Hi, I'm Stephen Grootes. For 4 days in January, the world's global elite will be focused on the small town of Davos. I'll be reporting live from there to bring you updates on the debates, discussions and decisions that will affect the global economy for years to come. Over the last few years, Africa has risen up the Davos agenda to get a sneak preview of what's going to be discussed and decided at Davos 2017. I'm here in Sandton, the centre of African capitalism at the headquarters of Ashburton Investments. And to discuss Davos 2017 with me is Shalin Bhagwan, the head of fixed income here at Ashburton Investments. Mark Appleton's the head of multi-asset and strategy for South Africa. And Nkareng Mpobane is a fund manager here at Ashburton Investments. Nkareng, let's jump straight into it. Investors, the people who go to Davos, the people who have money that comes in certain percentages every year, stability is what they crave. 2016, Brexit, Donald Trump. That stability has gone out of the window.
Certainly, Stephen. And our cue, I guess, or our takeoff from this is that this is probably why responsive and responsible leadership is the theme for this year. I think those participants, the Davos participants, are looking for leadership that's basically going to ensure that globalization is not a thing of the past, to ensure that economies do not become insular and very protectionist, because just looking into, on the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution, you need leadership that's basically going to haul us into that revolution.
Shalin, Donald Trump becomes president. I think it's actually on the last day of Davos this year. How do you see global markets reacting to his inauguration?
So, Stephen, I think the one word that we can associate with the Trump presidency is uncertainty. And for us as investors, certainly policy uncertainty is what worries us. And it's all sorts of uncertainty around foreign policy, but also financial policy that's followed within the US. Markets, however, seem to have reacted quite favorably if you invest in equity markets. Not so favorably for bond market investors who've seen bonds sell off quite substantially following the Trump election. And all this is premised on the fact that Trump should be spending more money and getting the US economy going. Specifically on the inauguration day, we don't think that there's any more risk than usually surrounds Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump's quite an ardent tweeter on Twitter. So I don't think we look into the inauguration specifically. And post the inauguration, however, I think what's going to be interesting is the dynamic between Mr. Trump and his fellow Republicans in the House, and how he manages to rally them around putting into action some of his plans. So that's more important for us.
Mark, leadership's one of the big focuses at Davos this year. Last year it was the fourth industrial revolution. There's a lot between the two, isn't there? A lot of commonality.
Absolutely, the one depends on the other. So from a South African point of view, we determined that the fourth industrial revolution was going to be particularly good from an educational perspective, from a financial services point of view, from the point of view that you can potentially use technology to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. There was a World Economic Forum competitiveness report, and we've actually been making some strides, believe it or not. Our education has actually improved. We've gone up the table in terms of the world competition. We're no longer number 49, we're number 47. But there are a couple of very important things that are worrying global investors, and the first amongst those is the lack of political leadership. The second one is political uncertainty, and the third one is government bureaucracy. And so it's particularly important and relevant that responsive and responsible leadership is the issue here. And hopefully South Africa can link into that and convince the rest of the world that we do have that as our objective.
We as South Africans, Mark, we're always talking about foreign investment. If foreign direct investment was some sort of voter, they would have a vote that really carries a big stick in South African politics. This is a chance for the rest of the world to see what we're like and for us to sell ourselves to the rest of the world. Pravin Gordhan's going. What would be his message, do you think?
We're open for business. Very important. South Africa is a capital-hungry nation. We import more than we export. And therefore we rely on the kindness of strangers in terms of getting capital into our country. Now, clearly, the better we come across to those people who fund us, effectively, the better it is in terms of the amount of money we have to pay or service, or the amount of interest that we have to pay on those loans.
Nkareng, I mean, South Africa no longer the biggest economy in Africa, which is something that we're still coming to terms with, I think, but certainly the most industrialized. I would say that this is the country where 4G internet works, but Rwanda, I think, would be furious if I said that. Should we try and be seen, I mean, as a strategy, should we try and be seen as part of the rest of Africa, or should we still hold ourselves slightly apart from Africa when we try to sell ourselves?
Stephen, it probably isn't a question of either or. We should certainly look at regions and territories in Africa where we could potentially realize growth from certain agreements we may reach with those regions. And I mean, demographics in Africa are certainly in that growth story. And as an industrialized African nation, we certainly are in a good position to basically lead the way in terms of development and innovation and playing a significant role in that fourth industrial revolution. We've got very robust financial system. We've got a robust financial system and stand in very good stead, I guess, to lead the way there for Africa and African growth and other nations beyond that.
Our institutions work. If you go to court, you'll get a result.
There we go. We've got, I think that's part of the message that Pravin can also go with. In the strength of our institutions, we saw that play out quite strongly last year.
Shalin, in a way, the World Economic Forum was a response to what happened in the Second World War, and you had, to an extent, the victors of that war creating a kind of capitalist model. It worked very well in Western Europe, worked very well in North America. Now we have the rise of a sort of state-led capitalism, if you can call it that, in China. You have I would call it a despotic capitalism in Russia. Is life a bit more complicated for the people who go to Davos nowadays than it was, say, 20 years ago?
Life's much more complicated. I think that's certainly the case. But I think just turning to the point around different systems or different ways of ruling economic systems coming to the fore, you know, the common thread for me anyway is the fact that there's a lot of people who feel like they've been left behind from the wealth that has been generated over the last 20 years. So whether it's Brexit, whether it's all the referendums going on in Europe, or the popularity of a Donald Trump in the US and Bernie Sanders before him, I think what you've seen is a lot of people putting their hands up saying, what about us? We've been left behind, we haven't shared in the wealth. And so I think capitalism in general has a few questions to answer. And I think this is what you've seen in some of these other countries that you mentioned. We still think that clearly the current system has a lot of scope, or is well suited to tackle the challenges. But I think there's again these themes of responsible leadership are going to be needed now more than ever.
Mark, there was a time when the US was the global, you could call it economic hyperpower if you liked. Now China sneezes, large parts of the globe start to get a bad case of the sniffles. The leader of China, Xi Jinping, is due to come to Davos for the first time. That's a symbolic moment, surely.
Very much so. You know, this time last year, Stephen, the main topic, the main concern amongst global investors was China. They were experiencing some very significant capital outflow. And this is worrying people in terms of the way currencies reacted to that and what it meant from a deflationary point of view, etc. This year, guess what? We're having the same sort of thing happening. Global reserves, not global reserves, but Chinese financial reserves have gone down from $4 trillion to $3 trillion. It's still a very substantial amount. But it's particularly pertinent that the Chinese leadership is there because this year it's all about this issue of anti-globalization. Now, the main victims of protectionism and populism and nationalism particularly are the Chinese. They need an open market, they need a place to sell their goods and services. So it's going to be very much upon them to convince the world that globalization is still a very good thing.
Mark Appleton, thank you very much indeed. Nkareng Mpobane and Shalin Bhagwan, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. Follow updates throughout the World Economic Forum 2017 on the special EWN portal, courtesy of Ashburton Investments. Thanks for watching. I'm Stephen Grootes.